You know, when I was playing this game as a kid, that big gleaming fire button always caught my imagination. I always thought that if you found a way to press it, you'd fire missiles at the rival vehicles or something. Yeah, I know, in real life a button would activate the fire extinguishers, but still, missiles make practically every game better. Except that one. Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at one of the grandfathers of computerized Formula 1 racing, Grand Prix Circuit. Because of the simplicity of this game, I don't have a lot to say about it, but maybe that's a good thing because this thing is built like a tank. As in, it doesn't look pretty, it sounds awful, but it gets the job done and it's still surprisingly playable despite its age. Which isn't as old as you might expect, but I'm already getting ahead of myself, so let's get to the game stats. Grand Prix Circuit was created by Distinctive Software, also known as DSI, and published by Accolade in 1988. Now, I want you all to keep that in mind because Stunts, another DSI racing game with full 3D graphics and everything, came out just 2 years later. The jump in quality is mystifying to say the least. It's a one-player racing game featuring support for multiple graphics modes but only PC speaker sound. The Tandy and EGA modes look pretty much identical, but the EGA mode requires less effort to configure DOSBox for, so that's the best mode to choose. As for its current release date, it's not only still commercial, but virtually impossible to find. Though if you do find a copy, it generally isn't too expensive considering how rare it is, usually ranging between $15 and $30. Though also keep in mind that this game came out on numerous platforms, so make sure you're getting the right version. So as is plainly obvious, the whole point of Grand Prix Circuit is to take control of a Formula 1 racing car and race your way to victory. You can either do this through single races or through a tournament mode that will take you through all 8 of the courses included with the game. Or you can just choose the practice mode and run laps for as long as you want. For the actual races, you could choose any number of laps you want from as high as 20 to as low as -9. Yeah, it's a bit of a bug, but if you choose anything less than 1, you'll just get a single lap anyways. The actual races also have a qualifying lap to see where you'll start in the grid. The skill selection is interesting in that there's 5 settings from full beginner to full pro. At the lowest skill level, transmission is automatic and there's no damage. At the next skill up, damage is introduced, and at the middle skill level, transmission becomes manual and it becomes possible to spin out if you turn too hard and at too high a speed. The higher the skill level is set, the faster the opponent cars become, and at maximum skill the opponents make very few mistakes and are generally very difficult to get a lead on. This leads to a very annoying situation where the highest skill setting feels too difficult, while the next skill down feels too easy. It goes to show that this game could have used a little more balancing. One curious thing I noticed while playing through this game for my first time in decades is that even though the track selection screen only shows the country names for the various tracks, they are actually real tracks, and once you finish racing on a particular track, the full name is shown at the top of the screen. Now, I'm going to give a listing of the real track names, but some of them are hard to pronounce, so forgive me if I mess some of them up. The Brazilian track is actually the Autodromo da Cidade do Rio de Janeiro, though it's actually been renamed since this game came out to the Nelson Piquet International Autodromo. It's a fairly tame but interesting track featuring a very long straightaway. The British track is actually Silverstone Circuit, also known as the home of British motor racing, and the reason why you don't recognize it is because this track has been redesigned so many times over the years that today little remains of the original design. This particular version of the track has a lot of sharp 90-degree corners to get in the way. The Monaco track is actually Circuit de Monaco and is considered one of the most technically challenging courses in all of Formula 1 racing, and is famous for having one of the tightest hairpin turns ever conceived. That said, this course didn't really translate well from the real City Street version, and as such, the version in this game really isn't that tough. The German course is Hockenheimring, which again you might not recognize because in 2001 this course had a major design change which drastically reduced the length of the track. For the most part, it's a fast track with lots of swerves and gentle corners, save for the last two which are super tight. The Canadian course is Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, which is a Quebec course and is pretty much the same track here as it is today. The Italian track is Autodromo Nazionale de Monza, a track that's infamous for the number of driver and spectator fatalities that have occurred on it over the years, mostly thanks to the incredible speeds reached on it. The Detroit, USA course is the Detroit Grand Prix Circuit, also known as the Detroit Street Circuit, which is another course that's barely changed, particularly because it's a course that's supposed to take place in the city streets, but I've always liked how they managed to shape it just like a jungle cat. Finally, the Japanese course is actually the Suzuka International Race Course, one of the very few F1 circuits in existence to feature an overpass, allowing for a figure-8 design that completely changes the dynamics of tire wear. At least it would if tire wear worked anything like real life in this game. No matter how long you set the race for it, your tires do not wear out at all unless you drive off the road. Not to mention, instead of actually having a tire wear gauge, you instead have an overall damage gauge, which also goes up whenever you bump a car. Though you can actually get into a collision accident without a full gauge, so don't take this gauge to mean you can do anything you want and survive. If you stop in the pit stop, you can either change the left or right wheels to restore half of your damage gauge, or change both wheels to restore the whole thing. In fact, one thing this game allows you to do that most racing games don't is this. Yep, you can blow your engine in this game, and it doesn't work as you might expect. Basically, each of the three vehicles you can drive have a red zone on their RPM gauge. If the needle hits the red zone, you have 2 seconds to get out of it, or it's goodbye engine. If you do get out of the red zone, either by shifting or braking, this 2-second time limit resets, so that the next time you enter the red zone, you once again have 2 seconds to get out of it. Now, the reason I haven't really talked about the gameplay itself is there's very little to say, except that it's using a rudimentary scanline engine. That is, each row of pixels has been pre-computed as to what it should look like given certain circumstances, and it's just shifted left or right based on your position on the road and whether or not there's a turn coming up. A lot of old racing games took this approach because it was a heck of a lot simpler to implement than true 3D graphics, not to mention requires very little processing power in comparison. The obvious drawbacks are that the more you turn side to side, the less accurate this representation becomes, and it's virtually impossible to simulate hard corners among other track features. The last thing I'll mention is that the game has 3 Formula 1 vehicles to choose from, each belonging to one of 3 teams: McLaren, Williams, and Ferrari. The McLaren car is the fastest, but handles the worst, the Ferrari is the slowest, but handles the best, and the Williams is a balance between the two. Despite these differences, they're actually very similar to each other, and you can still win an entire tournament racing any of them. Not to mention, all 3 of them are using Goodyear tires, meaning that particular stat on the car selection screen is entirely pointless and nothing more than product placement. Go figure. So yeah, that's Grand Prix Circuit, a very simple Formula 1 racing game that's still playable today. Though because of how little content there is, it won't hold your interest for very long, and it's certainly not worth going out of your way to get unless you like to collect old DOS games. DOSBox settings are really easy. Just set the cycles count to auto and you're good to go. This game has joystick support too, but I highly recommend sticking with the keyboard. The joystick support in this game is extremely sensitive, and since you have to hold up to accelerate, it's almost impossible to drive in a straight line with one. And once again, this is a game with disc-based copy protection, so be prepared to try and find a way to get around that. Anywho, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 60, where we're going to take a look at a 2D shooter that lets you arm yourself with a death ray. Which is even more hilarious when you realize that it's not even the best weapon you're allowed to acquire. If you think you know which game lets you do that, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to see this game in action. can either do this through single races or through a tournament mode that will take you through all 8 of the courses included with the game. Or you can just choose the practice mode.
Practice mode?
No, Mr. Practice Mode Man, we are not doing this joke. Shodan, get rid of him.
You are not welcomed here. Remove yourself.